Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur, Parsha's Savo. Two ideas I'd like to share with you. The first is something I saw in Rabbi Pinchas Roberts' Sefer. A very beautiful idea. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com and I'll send you the handout. Chazal place a lot of importance in a concept of smichas haparshas, the juxtaposition and the placement of various parshas in the Torah. And the beginning of this week's Seder is no exception. Parsha's Savo begins with the whole story of Bikurim. And it backs on from the end of Parsha's Kiseitze, which deals with Amalek. Last week's Seder, Parsha's Kiseitze, is chock-a-block with mitzvahs, 74 mitzvahs, and the last one is Zechiras Amalek. Take a look at the first book, Zocher es asher os lecha Amalek, Baderech b'seischa Mitzrayim, and it finishes off, Timche zecha Amalek, mitachas hashamayim, lo tishkach. And then, next week, Parsha's Kisave, the next pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'hoya kisove el haaretz asher Hashem lekecha noisach nachla v'yirishta v'yoshavta bo v'lokachta mereshis kol pri eitz hadoma." So kol pri hadoma asher tovi me'aretz asher Hashem lekecha noisinach. The Parsha of Bikurim. What is the juxtaposition of Bikurim following on from Amalek? So the Be'er Moshe, Rabbi Roberts quotes the Be'er Moshe, and he says the following: "Having espoinen ma'inyan mechias Amalek she'usi in Parshas Hakadem is the mitzvahs Bikurim." And furthermore, he says the parsha begins v'hoya kisavai. The hoya is a vav meisif alin rishon. The Gemara says in Pesachim in Daf Hey Amud Aleph, which is Mlamdeinu sheyesh eze kesher ben shtei hamitzvahs. So, in addition to the general smicha, in particular, in the beginning of Parshas V'hoya Kisava, you've got a vav meisif which connects the two. So, it's meisif al inyan rishon. What exactly is the connection? So, based on the Be'er Moshe, but not exactly, I think, Rabbi Roberts wanted to say the following. We know that humility, anova, is one of the primary midas that a person should aspire to. The Igeres Ramban makes this very clear. If you look at the fourth box, Shma b'ni musa avicha v'al titash teres imecha tisnaheg tamid, the most beautiful letter. The Igeres Ramban, as he was making his way in his final years to Eretz Yisrael, fleeing from the difficulties after having won the disputation, he then writes this famous letter, and he gives an ethical will to his family and ultimately to the whole of the Jewish people for all time. And he says, "Tisnahig tamid ledabe kol dvarecha b'nachas." Speak gently, lekol adam, to every single person, of a chol eis in every situation. L'bozeh tinotzlo min hakas, and that will save you from getting angry. Shehi midara lahachti bnei adam, which is a terribly serious crime which causes you to do averos. V'kashet tinotzlo min hakas ta'ala libcha midas ha'nova. And if you eradicate anger from your heart, you will promote anova within you. Shehi midda toiva mikol hamidas tovas, because anova, humility, is the choicest of all of good character traits. Now, thinking about it, Bikurim is really an expression of humility. How so? A person has a field. We were just away in the summer, and you're more sort of close to nature than you are during the course of the year. And you see in somewhat an agricultural lifestyle and way. And you go out into the fields and you see that, the life of a farmer, it's so distant to us in normal times. But the life of a farmer is potentially arrogant-inducing and sometimes humility-inducing. But imagine you work hard. You go out into the field. You plow it. You then sow it. You water it. You cultivate it. And you see that the rain comes in the right time. You realize that you're totally reliant on HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the success, for your material success. And it's self-effacement at its best. And then you realize that, if it wasn't for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's assistance, you wouldn't be able to produce anything. And then you harvest the crop and you bring it in. And a person recognizes ultimately it comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he therefore brings the first crops and he dedicates them to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he makes the declarations, and essentially he's saying that my total dependence is on you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's an expression of total self-effacement. That's humility at its best. In fact, the Medrash says, one of the very first Midrashim in the whole of Torah, in the beginning of Bereshis, the Medrash Rabbi says, B'zchus gimel dvarim nivra ha'olam, and one of them is B'zchus bikurim. The Medrash says, Ma tam Bereshis bar Elokim, ve'in Reishis ela bikurim. In other words, Bereshis bar Elokim, 4 Reishis. What is Reishis? The Reishis that we're referring to, Ein Reishis ela bikurim, Shenema Reishis bikur ad moscha. The whole world was worth creating just for the expression of humility on the part of the occupant of this world. That is Bikurim. In stark contrast, as a polar opposite, you have Amalek. Amalek is Gaiva, is a supreme arrogance. When the whole world saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu's demonstration of his absolute supremacy by bringing the superpower of the day to its knees, by administering 10 makas on the Mitzrayim, and bringing Klal Yisrael out, and taking Klal Yisrael under his patronage, all the nations trembled and were petrified, apart from Amalek. They had a certain brazenness, a certain mocking and cynical nature, which is its roots lies in its arrogance. In fact, the gematria of Amalek is 240, which is the gematria of Rom, which means mighty, which is an expression of Gaiva. So you see that the juxtaposition of Bikurim at the beginning of this week's Sedra and Amalek at the end of last week's Sedra is to show that the antidote to arrogance, to the conceited Amalek, lies in the humility of Bikurim. And in a way, if you think about it, there is a mitzvah at the end of last week's Sedra, Timche Zeicha Amalek. How do we do that nowadays? We've got no real way of expressing that mitzvah today. We don't even know who Amalek is. Sancherev came, or Bilbeles Olam, he mixed all the nations. We're not sure who Amalek is really. So how can we fulfill something which is nitzchias, Timche Zeicha Amalek? Well, perhaps one way, says the Be'er Moshe, is that we can work on our humility and uproot the arrogance within ourselves, and that is a fulfillment of Timche Zeicha Amalek. And that really is a very good way to prepare for the Yom Noraim. How so? The Kedushas Levi says a very beautiful idea. The Kedushas Levi says one of the high points of the Tefillah over the Yom Noraim is Be'ein Meilitz Yoshe. Says the Kedushas Levi, the Beditsheva, that perhaps you read it as follows. Be'ein, when a person comes in, Be'ein, that I'm nothing. There for the grace of God go I, it's all HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That it could be, life is so fragile. But Ein, a person comes with that spirit of Ein, that is a Meilitz Yoshe. That is the greatest advocate that we can ever present, Mul Magid Pesha, against the Averas that we've done. But Ein Meilitz Moshe, a person comes with a certain degree of humility. And that also explains why, when it comes to Slichas, we always begin, Hashem, next this Motzei Shabbos, Sunday, we'll start saying Slichas. And we begin the opening paragraph with words at the beginning of that paragraph, Rabbi used to say that in Perek Hashira, in Perek Shira, this is the pasuk of one of the animals. Which animal? Which we say on Friday night, by the way, in the davening and before the Chadaydi, that these words is the capital of the Kelev. Why do we refer to the Perek Shira of the Kelev in Slichas? Rabbi once said that a Kelev, the Gemara says, is always hungry. A dog is always hungry. And he's roaming the streets trying to find his next meal. A dog represents a person who understands that his life is precarious. That I don't know where my next meal is coming from. And that is a very good way to go into Yom Noraim. To realize that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me last year, there's no automatic assurance that he's going to carry on. That we have to realize that life is very precarious. I think we're living in a world where we recognize how precarious life is. And therefore, in a way, somewhat it's easier to do that. In fact, that's one of the reasons that we have 9 brachos in our Rosh Hashanah Tefillah. Gemara says in Brachas Chavtes, Hani Teisha Rosh Hashanah Keneged Mi. Why do we have 9? We have Shemona Esrei or 19 now. We have different number of brachas in different times of the year. Why are there 9 sections, 9 brachas to our Shemona Esrei and Rosh Hashanah? Amar B'Yitzchak Zemin Katruginon Keneged Tisha Azkar She'amra Chana B'Tfilah. It corresponds to the tefillah, the famous tefillah, Tfilas Chana, the passage which we lay as one of the haftarahs on Rosh Hashanah. Keshes Gibayrim Chatim v'nichshalim arzu chayil. The bowels of the mighty are broken. Those who stumbled and are girded with strength. It's always a story of contrasts. Those who are high and mighty can be broken. Those who stumbled in the past are given strength. Seveim balechem niskaru. Those who were satisfied had to hire themselves out for bread. Ure'evim chodelu. Those who are hungry have ceased. They're no longer hungry. Adakari yoloda shiva. While the barren woman has borne 7, v'rabas banim umlala, the lady who had many children has been bereaved. A story of contrast. Hashem meimis umechaya, Kodesh Baruch Hu kills and makes alive. Morid she'ol vayal, he brings down to the grave and raises up. Hashem moirish u'mashe, he makes poor and he makes people rich. Mashbel af meremim, he humbles, he exalts. That is exactly the point. One of the reasons why we have 9 brachas in our Rosh Hashanah Shemona Esrei and why we lay this haftarah on Rosh Hashanah is to remind us how precarious life is, how things can change, the situations are so volatile. And that's what the Gemara means in Rosh Hashanah Tezayin. Famous Gemara, Amar B'Yitzchak, Kol Shana She'Rosha B'Tchilasa Misasheres B'Sofa. Whenever you have a year which is Rosha, which is impoverished at the beginning, will have a happy end. Says Rashi, She'Rosha B'Tchilasa She'Yisrael Eisin Atzman Roshin. We make ourselves as low, as impoverished. We've got no zuchuyas. We turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with genuine humility, and we speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'daber tachanunim b'tfilah. Then misasheres b'sofa. Then it will be a successful, happy year in the end. But it starts with humility, and that's why the teichacha in Savo is followed by Netzavim, which is the Shabbos always of the beginning of the Slichas period, to show the precariousness of life. Because that's what the teichacha is. In fact, the gematria of Atem Nitzavim Hayoim is gematria 694, La'amod L'Slichas. So you see that, says Rabbi Roberts, that the connection between Amalek at the end of last week's Sedra and Bikurim at the beginning of this week's Sedra is to highlight the contrast of the conceited, arrogant Amalek at the end of last week's Sedra, and the antidote to it is the Anova, which really is what Bikurim is all about. Bringing your Bikurim, recognizing our total dependence on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is self-effacement at its best, and it's so powerful that the whole world was worth being created for just for this. And that's really the background, and it's the preparation for the Yom Neroim. Be'ein meilitz yosha. The best meilitz yosha is be'ein, when we recognize we go in not thinking too much of ourselves. And that's why we dafka draw on the posuk of the Kelev in Slichas, to show that we're also living a very precarious life. And that's really what the Haftarah of Chana, and that's why we have 9 brachas as I've described. Okay, let's move on to another theme. Now, this idea I said last year, but I want to add a very beautiful Hosafa to it, which I'll explain in a minute. The Parsha begins with Bikurim, like I described. And the Pasuk says, Uvas al HaKohen, you bring your basket of fruit to the Kohen, V'lokach HaKohen hatenem yodecha, he brings the basket, V'nichu lifnei mizbeach Hashem lokecha, the Kohen takes the basket, and he presents it towards to the Mizbeach, and to the foot of the Mizbeach, V'oniso v'amarta, and then the person makes the declaration, Aram Yomi, etc., etc. And then the Kohen can eat the Bikurim and can enjoy it. Now, this declaration, the Kohen says the words. Why doesn't the person who brings the Bikurim, why doesn't he say the words? So the Mishnah says in Bikurim, B'Rishayna, this is in Perek Gimel Mishnah Zayin, this is in the second paragraph on the second page. B'Rishayna, originally, Kol mi she'yodea likros, whoever was able to read, Koira, he could read the Parsha. He brings the Bikurim and he makes the declaration. V'chol mi she'en yodea likros, and whoever couldn't read, makri noisei, then you help him read. So nimnu melahavi. So then people didn't bring Bikurim. They were so embarrassed. They're coming to the Beis Hamikdash and they can't read, so they've got to stand up and publicly they can't do it. It's so humiliating. The Kohen's got to help him read and read for him. So therefore they stayed at home. Nimnu milahavi. Hiskinu she'emakrin es misha yadeh ves misha ein yadeh. So therefore they changed the rules to protect the embarrassment of that person. They made a takana that the Kohen is always going to read and not the person bringing the Bikurim, even if he could read himself. Now, that's Mishnah Zayin. The next Mishnah, Mishnah Ches, this is in Perek Gimel of Bikurim, says the following: Ha'ashirim meviim bikureihem b'klosa shel kesef. That the wealthy people could bring Bikurim in very fancy trays and bowls, shel kesef, shel zahav, silver and gold. V'haniyim meviim osam b'tzlin tzarim shel arov v'klufa. They would bring it in cheap wicker baskets. V'hasalim v'bikurim nitnim l'kohanim. And the rule is that the Kohen would take the salim and the Bikurim, would take the baskets of the poor people. Mashenke, in the wealthy people, they would spill out the Bikurim, the Kohen would take it home, and then they would return the expensive baskets to the Ashirim. We've discussed this in previous years, but anyway, not for now. What you see is something fascinating. Chazal instituted that everyone should have a Kohen recite the words for him, regardless of whether or not he could read, so as not to shame those who couldn't read. So why don't we enact similarly that everyone should bring Bikurim in straw baskets? It's so embarrassing. I'm bringing it, I can't afford a fancy basket, so I'm bringing it in a very cheap straw basket. And what's going to happen? That some people are coming with fancy baskets, some are coming with cheap baskets, and then what's more, that the Kohen will spill out the fruit, and then he'd give back the expensive baskets to the person, to the giver. But I'm not. If I've got a cheap basket, he just takes my basket. Why didn't we make a similar enactment that everyone should bring in a straw basket? In the same way that we made a takana that everyone, the Kohen reads the Parsha for everyone, even for those people who can read themselves. So I saw this last year, and I mentioned this in I think last year's shir from Rabbi Isaac Bernstein. The following answer: the first enactment, i.e., that Berishona Kol Mishu Likros and would read, and everyone couldn't read, and then Nimnu Lahavi Hiskinu Shiur Makrin Misha there. That they made an enactment that everyone should have a Kohen recite the words for them. That enactment achieved two things. Number one, it spared the shame of those who couldn't read. That's what we were probably understanding. And number two, a subliminal message, but a very important message. It let people know that not being able to read is worth being ashamed about. And therefore, Chazal made a takana for this. Not being able to read, that's terrible. Education is primary. This is how you're going to access our heritage. We need to know. And therefore, the second objective of this enactment was to let people know that not being able to read is worth being ashamed about. And therefore, we're going to deal with it. Mashen Kain, you can only afford a straw basket. Okay, Seder. HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs Parnasa. You can try hard. You can be a very intelligent person, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't bless you with wealth. That's okay. Nothing to be embarrassed about. No need to make that takana. Adkan. That's the answer that Rabbi Emanuel Bernstein gave. The difficulty is, when I said this last year, my wonderful nephew, came out to me with a great kasha. His name is Gabi Lukner. And he came out to me with the following question. He says, but what about the Gemara in Moed Katan? You see, the Gemara in Moed Katan says, this is the last box on the page, Tanu Rabbanon, b'rishayna hayu molichin b'beis ovel, they would bring food to the house of mourning, to the base ovel, to a shiva house. Ashirim b'klosa shel kesef v'shel zahav. A person wants to do a meal rota. So the wealthy people come along with very fancy trays, gold and silver trays, with all the food on it to give to the Avelim. And when a poor person wanted to give and be part of this meal rota, they would come along and they would give, but on straw baskets, because that's all they could afford. And the Aniyim were embarrassed. So they made a takana. They made a takana that everyone should bring on straw baskets to protect the honor of the Aniyim. So the question is, you see clearly that Chazal did make a takana to save the poor from embarrassment. It flies in the face of the answer we just gave. So perhaps, it's worth thinking about this question, but perhaps the answer is this. Bikurim involves lots of hidurim, pomp and ceremony. You learn the Mishnayos and Bikurim, you see the whole pomp and the ceremony that is attached with the bringing of Bikurim. And Chazal wanted to make it as festive as possible. And therefore, they wanted people to come along with fancy trays and with silver and with gold and be that and whatever it was, because that enhanced, that added to the whole ceremony of the occasion. And if a person couldn't afford it, okay, that's not the end of the world. That's life. It's not worth making a takana, because ultimately we want there to be pomp and ceremony and honor when it comes to the mitzvah of Bikurim. But when it comes to a shiva house, there's no need to bring food on a silver tray. The main thing is the Avelim have what to eat. They're sitting shiva, they can't make food the whole week, so they need to have what to eat. So therefore there's no pomp and ceremony involved, there's no need to bring it on silver trays, and there the whole focus was to protect the aniyim from embarrassment. Fine, everyone brings on these the cheap straw trays. And therefore, perhaps that is the difference between the explanation, the answer to the question. But either way, a very interesting insight, a good question on Rabbi Bernstein's answer that we said last year, and a suggested answer. Okay, thank you.